Well, and last but not least, very exciting fireside chat coming up. I'm honored to tell you more about our special guest, Abhijay. And let me give you a little bit of an introduction. And Abhijay, thank you very much for joining us. So he's president of Universal Film Entertainment Group and a member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. He's responsible for driving the studio's strategic and long-range planning, while also overseeing the business operations. Previously, he's been doing this for years. He served as COO of DreamWorks Animation, COO of Focus Features, EVP of Universal Pictures, and during his tenure at Universal, he served as consultant at Boston Consulting Group and been in the media and entertainment division. He also held positions at IGN Entertainment, Artisan Entertainment, which became Lionsgate, and actually before that, a public policy researcher, which we're not going to talk about today, but we're going to focus on entertainment, Hollywood, and new technologies. Thank you very much for joining us, Abhijay.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Let's so as we talked, and typical for our fireside chats, we do a bit about the past for context, we do about the present, and we talk about the science fiction and the future. So I heard an interview you did where you said that when you were a kid, you were obsessed with movies, television, sports, and entertainment, which probably is similar to many kids. But what was your favorite show? What resonated with you back then that maybe has an impact somehow directly or indirectly with what you're doing today?
Yeah, I was definitely obsessed as a kid. I watched everything, so much so that my parents actually had to come up with a chart that limited my TV hours for the week. So I actually had to plan it out so that I stayed within the time frame. So much to choose from. I watched so much stuff. But if I had to call out one thing, Evan, this will age me and date me, and you can judge me for it. Miami Vice was probably the TV show that I would call out for a couple reasons. One, it was cops and robbers, and I was a young boy. Two, it was aspirational, right, with the cars and the beaches and the lifestyle. Three, which I discovered later, the look of the show and its style was Michael Mann, this kind of singular filmmaker that became, as I grew up, one of my favorite filmmakers. And then finally, there was an illicit aspect to it, right? I'd go to school and the other kids would be like, wait, your dad lets you watch that show? And that kind of made it cooler. And it was a special time where me and my dad just got to do that. My sister had gone to bed. And so that illicit aspect and that connection with my dad, that also helped. And just as a postscript to it, ultimately, when I got to Universal, I was fortunate enough, through Academy things and through a movie that we did with him to meet Michael Mann and actually tell him how much impression he made on me as a young child. So yeah, that's the one I'd call out.
Cool. The next thing, which I think is interesting, which relates to our technology discussion today, and you were about to go to get a PhD in economics, but all of a sudden you made a decision to join a startup. How did you make that decision, and why? Is that and any regrets doing that?
Right. Well, again, this will date me, but when the internet was happening the first time, was right around the moment where I was, contemplating at this career crossroads of like going and enrolling. I think I'd already enrolled to like a PhD program at the University of Michigan in economics, and then there was the siren call of all my friends taking these jobs in the Bay Area where they're passing out signing bonuses and stock options to work on all kinds of .coms, and I was like, well, you're kind of only young once. Let me try this. It's a very different lifestyle. So I deferred for a year. Of course, never went back, and went out there, moved west. They paid for everything to come out. And it was a media company too, which was always a thing of interest to me. At the time, it was snowball.com. Ultimately, it's free, ad-supported business model. Didn't pan out for everything, and the only part that remained and survived was IGN, which subsequently got bought by News Corp. But that gave me the taste that you could work in media and have kind of an analytics and in my case, economics background with some computer science that I studied, and I kind of got the bug. And then it was, hey, how can I work in media? It's collaborative, it touches on the creative, and I kind of got juiced by that. And then it was the discovery that existed in the movie business, which was my kind of ultimate, the kind of thing on the top of the hill that I'd aspire for. And when I discovered that was a possibility, that sort of just led me right down here to the point, much to my dad and parents' chagrin, that I turned down pre-IPO jobs at places like Google to come work at a movie studio for pay. What I met my wife there though at
that's at least that's a fantastic positive, right?
Yeah, once we had our first kid, then my parents reminding me what my options would have been worth, because can't put a price on a grandchild. But
exactly.
Up until then, I get these notes like every couple of months of like, stock doubled again, they split, and I still have.
So similar to you, my background, well, I was a photographer, a photo agent, and a photo buyer, and I landed in Silicon Valley in '95. And I said I joined this new company called At Home Network, and I told my father I was all excited about the salary and the options. He said, forget about the options. They focus on the salary. Are you happy doing what you're doing? And and then that company went public. So similar to your parents, like, oh, there's a little bit of a context there.
Yeah.
In these last 17 years, all these different entertainment Hollywood businesses, what in your mind is the biggest technological advancement that has made the biggest impression on you since you started working in Hollywood?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what used to be narrow is now broad, and I'd say it's happened in two dimensions, right? There is the democratization on the creation of content, right? You have Steven Soderbergh and all kinds of folks making movies on iPhones, but just all those technologies, editing technology, all these things are at your fingertips, and they weren't before, right? It was very narrow who had access to those things, and very expensive and specialized, right? So that's one, like lots of people being able to create content, the democratization of that. And then the other one is the expansion of the platforms in which content is consumed, right? It used to, again, be very narrow. It was big screen in a movie theater, TV screen at home. That was really it as far as audiovisual technology goes. And now you've got phones and mobile and screens all over the place, right? Even what you can watch on an airplane has multiplied from what it used to be. And so those two things have just dramatically changed everything. The democratization of who can create and what you can create in terms of content, the technologies and tools there, as well as where it can be consumed. Those are probably the two biggest things.
That's perfect, because that's going to lead into a bunch of our questions, as you know, coming into this fireside chat. Relating to that, I think, from a high-end, great content production entities, and comparing with, as you mentioned, democratization, how do you define storytelling in a digital age now? I mean, what is the definition of digital storytelling?
I tend to take the more expansive view. I think some folks are traditionalists of like there's long form and that's the kind of only way that you do it. But I think of it and not genericizing the term, but as content, and you can do storytelling in shorter formats as well. So it kind of depends on your perspective. But I think anything that engages folks, maybe it's just the beginning of a story that you're putting out there in short form content. To me counts. And if it's compelling and you can get people to be engaged with it, I tend to take the view that anything that accomplishes that is a form of storytelling. And I find that to be such a powerful thing. I think one of the other things I discovered when I was a kid that always amazed me is that someone in some room somewhere at the time, just Hollywood, could write something, put it out, and then it would go everywhere in the world. And that is, and of course, the most compelling things are the ones that have the most compelling storytelling behind them, right? So of course, you can put shards of content and memes and things. The meme storytelling, I don't know, somebody else can judge that. But if it has an effect on you, to me it counts. And the fact that if you now you can put it out there and it can kind of go everywhere, right? Like if I logged on to this fireside chat today with my cat filter on, everybody would know what I was talking about. Right?
Absolutely, it's true. I mean,
I don't know how to do that, so we don't have to worry about it, and don't want my kids near this thing. But that's just how powerful storytelling is, and that's always amazed me. So I tend to take that most expansive view.
Well, what's interesting you said there, I kind of caught, was years ago you could create content and distribute it everywhere.
Yeah.
And today you can create content and distribute it everywhere. But the definition of anywhere is exponentially further to every device, to every person, to every corner than it was before, and it's probably going to go even further. And there's one question I always debate with people. I mean, my background as a photographer: is technology a means to the end, or the end? Is content king?
obviously working at a content company, I have a bias towards content. I do think it is, like any of those formulations, a little bit simplistic, because the temptation is like, if something's king, then everybody else is sort of subject. And I don't think it works that way, right? It's an ecosystem,
Yeah,
and
that's true.
content exists in the ecosystem. Because I wouldn't say that the distribution gatekeepers are without power, right? They play an important role, not just in terms of what content owners get paid, but even what gets served up, right? Look at the battle between Epic and Apple, and Epic and Google. That's a content company and a gatekeeper, and I think you'd be hard pressed to say that the distribution gatekeepers in Apple and Google's case, are kind of without power or subjects to Epic. Let's see how it plays out ultimately. I think it's fascinating, but
Yeah.
I think of our content as existing in its ecosystem, and of course, I think we believe, and I think this is indisputable, which is if you have great content, you have a business, you are relevant. And so in that sense, I do think that it is paramount, and you kind of don't have anything else without it. I spent a lot of time thinking about business models, but at the end of the day, if you don't have compelling content, I can drop the best business model on a white piece of paper. It won't matter. You have to have that is compelling, and so that it does all start there.
Which is why I actually believe, even though, interesting enough, as a venture capital fund investing in people building technology, I believe content is king. Because even your example, as you're referring to, between Apple and Epic and the others, if there'd be no battle if they weren't battling over content and making money over content. And so without the content, there's nothing to distribute, and there's no argument, and there's no business model. And so I always go back to, what is the contextually relevant content for a given person at a given time at a given place. And so the next question relates to what you were saying. Hollywood historically, it's about creating visual content. It's about IP, franchises. Used to be more theaters, rentals, and now streaming and merchandising. What new channels are exciting you? What are you testing, in your world that you can share with us? And or where is the exponential growth and new revenue opportunities?
Yeah, I think, look, it's one of the reasons I'm here. I want to learn more about it. It's how you and I started talking, Evan, is that expansion that I was alluding to earlier and that you're referencing now, I think is an exciting opportunity, certainly for any content creator or for people who want to become content creators. But I think it's also exciting for Hollywood studios who have IP and talent that want to tell stories and want to engage consumers. And I think what we've done, if you're thinking very legacy, you define us as a theatrical movie studio. And we're moving away from that, right? One of the things that we talk a lot about inside the studio is thinking of ourselves as a content creation studio or a content and IP studio, so that we're not defined by just making movies that go in movie theaters. You have to think of a more expansive view of what our business is. And so first, defining yourself that way is important. Then second, what are you going to do about it? The natural extension is already happening, of course, which is you make movies, but you don't make them necessarily just for theaters, and they can go to streaming platforms and other places. So that one's on its way. Then there's the one beyond that, which is with all these platforms, and whether it's TikTok, or it could be OnlyFans or Patreon or all the creator economy, how can we tap into that with our IP and our talent, right? And I don't know that we figured that out yet, but I'm fascinated by that. To me, that's super exciting. What can we do? How can we bring Jurassic, Minions, Fast, Pitch Perfect into these different environments and platforms to get consumers to engage with it? Like, I look at the music business, and understandably, it's a different format, right? Audio visual, is more sensory and dominates. When you're consuming content, and music can exist sort of in a parallel or background way as an enhancement. So we have to figure out how it works. But you just broadly look at what music has done in terms of getting to these different platforms, right? With TikTok is a great example. What's our version of that? Is that VR, AR? Is that, how do we get onto all the billions of phones around the world in a more penetrating way that's still compelling for the consumer? I don't know exactly what those are. There's multiple examples. Maybe we'll talk about a few that we've tried. But that is the promise, and that's what we're trying to figure out.
Got it. We'll jump in a couple of these new channels and others, but I also, before we get too far in, the pandemic has drastically impacted us on many levels, and health is most important, but it's definitely drastically impacted how people consume content over the last 10 or 12 months. What was the biggest surprise to you as the trend was happening of people hibernating?
The biggest surprise? Yeah, I think, I mean, definitely the adapting to everything has just, scrambled all of our plans. So everything that happened was kind of new. We were almost in like a crisis mode when it comes to our business. Of course, the first priority, as you said, was safety. Then beyond that was how do we keep going, put one foot in front of the other instead of just turning off all the lights and hibernating until this is over, which didn't seem like the right move. I think the biggest surprise to us, and I wouldn't say I was that surprised by it, but some folks were, was just how already kind of this pre-pandemic trend of consumption of content in the home, let's say, was growing, right? SVOD being the subscription video on demand offering being the greatest example. The rapidity with which it accelerated and how fast it grew. And we could see it show up, as we watched our revenues go in digital transactional like VOD and EST, but also in streaming. And you could just see the tremendous growth of those. Even our trailers, which used to be a good proxy for how much someone would consume, they went through the roof because people were consuming at home. And I think the other part that was happening was there wasn't a lot of new content, right? The space, the kind of cultural space in which content landed got quieter. There weren't as many things out there. Obviously, sports and other things were shut down. So you kind of had this double effect of the things that were out there, had kind of more oxygen around them. And then second, folks were consuming so much at home that they really, really grew. And so I think maybe people could have pieced that together. That would have happened, but it still surprised us the extent to which it did. And then I think the real question that we spent a lot of time thinking about, and maybe too much time, we've crossed over the productivity threshold, but is thinking about the new normal. When it comes out the other side and when folks are able to leave their home again, how much of these current consumption habits stay and how much kind of revert back to the way things used to be, and kind of figuring out where that lands is the important part for how we, release movies and calibrate our business and even what types of content we make.
You perfectly segued to the next question, which you started getting at. So since you're thinking so much about that, what's your hypothesis?
I think stuff doesn't come back to the 2019, right? I think the trends were already headed in one direction, right? You could look at things that we've been facing for a long time as a business, like per capita movie going, right? It's actually been on a per capita basis, declining for a while. We've been able to keep the overall box office healthy with growth in ticket prices and things, but the per capita movie going has had some pressure for a while. I think that might accelerate a bit afterwards, right? And so it comes back because I think people are going to go to the theaters again, but maybe not quite to the levels that it was. I think we've expanded, we've done some research, the amount of people that consume, like on iTunes and Amazon and those digital platforms. You can literally see, the growth in new accounts spending money to consume content at home. I don't think that goes away. So I do think that there's a bit more of a transfer, but it's continuing a trend that we saw from before. And then I think short form content, right? Or I don't really have a better phrase for it, but these other platforms where content is consumed and created, like I was alluding to earlier, where that's TikTok or OnlyFans or Patreon and those things. I think that some of that's sticky too. That's also going to stay, which sort of puts more pressure or motivation or urgency for us to figure out how do we make those relevant for our business, right? Do we need to create tools for, I was reading this piece in the New York Times about Harry Potter TikTok, right? And people spending hours to put themselves into scenes from Harry Potter, like 10 hours to put themselves in a short scene. Yeah. And you think, wow, Warner Brothers didn't have anything to do with what happened. Excuse me. But there's something there, right? If there's such passion for that, for the people that create it, as well as from those who consume it, how do we tap into that? What's our version of that? Can we give tools to make it easier for you to insert yourself in, Dom's charger and drive along in a Fast and Furious scene, or interact with a minion and push that out into the world? And so those are the kinds of things I think we're looking to crack and find the right technologies and the right platforms for that to be in front of consumers.
I think it's fascinating. It's similar to my keynote a couple hours ago, talked a lot about that and the metaverse and, concerts where millions of people were watching a singer in a virtual world, or people trying on Adidas and Nike clothing on their avatars. And so, one of the things I get asked all the time, obviously, investing in people early stage. They've got this vision. They let's say hypothetically they want to work with Universal. They want to work with Abhijay. And so I think we in a pre-call talked about kind of 4 different categories. You know, the things that you say, oh my God, if I could work with X, Y, and Z, this is what we'd be interested in trying or testing. To your point, how do we test, or how do you test new opportunities, either virtual worlds or avatars? And so what have you tested today, and a couple of insights into, you know, how can entrepreneurs work best with you to help everybody win?
Yeah. Well, when it comes to some of these new technologies and formats, usually the place that we end up, touching it the first time is in marketing. I think because couple reasons. One, in a typical year, we have like 20, 30 marketing campaigns we're launching for our slate across Universal and Focus and DreamWorks and Illumination. So we have a lot of times we're putting new content out in the world, and we're trying to reach audiences, particularly those harder to reach digital millennial audiences. So we end up, our digital marketing department is the one that's probably most on the forefront of all those new technologies, because they have to see where consumers are. And then the lift is usually not that much of a lift. You don't have to do some big multi-year licensing deal. You're like, I got an asset, you have a platform, let's construct a promotion. It'll run from this time to this time. And so we've done that a couple times. I think we might have talked about it before, but we had a movie called Freaky that came out last year where we did a partnership with this company called Reface. And it allowed you to insert your own face on top of Vince Vaughn, the villain of the movie, his face. And so you could put yourself in the trailer, doing all these silly things that Vince Vaughn was doing in the trailer. And that's just one example of us being able to try.
Yeah, regarding that example, Abhijay, my history with working with Hollywood, or trying to, the holy grail of our IP and content, to be able to allow people then to put their heads on it with, let's say, Reface, or our other companies that are out there. I mean, is it just got to a time where everybody was willing to try it, or was that beating your head against the wall to justify, hey, we got to at least, we should try this? And others, I'm sure, were saying, you can't do that to our content.
It does take the right combination of internal will and filmmaking partner. We have this great partner in Jason Blum and Blumhouse, Jason is a force of nature, but he's game for everything, right? So when we are doing our premium video on demand model, or we're doing something like Reface, he's in for it. And frankly, most of our filmmakers are, because ultimately they want their content to be reaching all the different parts of the audience, including those that live on a lot of these new digital platforms. So I would say the bar for the content owners, or as us as the owner and our partners as the filmmakers, for experimenting and trying these new platforms, is the bar is pretty low. Like, they're into it. They want to do that, and it's part of how we sell ourselves and our world-class marketing, is that we'll go to those places and we'll try it out, and trust us, we'll do it in a way that's fitting with the brand. Like that movie, right. It has a kind of silly premise, and so it's fun and kind of silly to put your face on there. It might not work so well with other types of content, right? But on that one it did. And so I don't think that bar is so high. What is harder, and I think you're kind of alluding to this, Evan, is setting up, and harder but also more exciting, is setting up something that's sort of a long-term commercial arrangement, a monetization opportunity for us, where we're saying, not only was it just a one-time thing on this movie, we are now going to, I'll make it up, give all of our library of IP, license it to one platform, and create a host of tools for self-insert videos and user-generated content, where you can, play with, I know AI folks don't call it IP, they'll call it data, so I'll call it data too. You'll give our data hit here, and you can use it to create all kinds of stuff. That's a bigger deal. Then you get all kinds of, okay, well, how's it going to be used? And I want to make sure it's, consistent with the style guide of the IP and all that. And so that bar is higher when you get to a monetization opportunity, but we're not shying away from it. I want to figure that out.
Good. And it's always helpful when, the early test projects or collaborations, for them to know they have to go to marketing and focus on those budgets first and go further. I think we talked, about 4 different categories of technologies. One is marketing for you. Another is kind of production, dubbing, post-production. Another is kind of new radical ways to produce. And 4 is kind of the new monetization opportunities. So I think the last 2 are most interesting. When you say radically alter how we produce, I mean, obviously AI video, and we've got an investment in a company called Synthesia, which is AI video. Short term, it's more marketing, e-learning kind of platform, which you can write text and create avatars. But what is your definition of radically alter? Like,
Yeah.
how do you define that? Some people say in other businesses, oh, it has to be 10x or 50x faster, cheaper, or blah, blah, blah. But what's your definition to say, oh my God, that could radically alter?
I mean, I take 2x in our business, Evan.
Right. So
But
exactly, that's why I asked, because
yeah,
context for everybody is really important. I mean, you ask somebody what's a lot of money, and every single person will disagree with what a lot of money is on this audience of hundreds of people.
yeah, yeah,
And so you
yeah,
say 2x.
yeah.
Okay, 2x defined by what?
Yeah, sure. So I'll give you an example. If I think about animation, right? I worked at DreamWorks for a while as a COO. One of the things that it was an overcome for me just to get my head around it, coming from more working in live action, is how long it takes to make an animated feature. It is a lengthy process, and you use mostly it's a proprietary pipeline that you use, but the technology for doing it is time consuming, right? Of animation, and then you go through this process of lighting and finishing, and you don't have the rendering is one of the issues that takes a long time. Game engine, right? That technology, using game engine technology to do animation, to create content, allows for real-time rendering, right? The way that obviously they do in games, as the name implies. If you can make movies that way, not only could it dramatically reduce the time, right? Maybe by 2x, but it also allows for an entirely different process for the content creator, for the director, and for the folks overseeing animation, to see what they're doing in real time, adjust, change the performance, try out different things, and you could end up with a different piece of content as well. When you have these advances, you can decide then as the producer and as the content creator how you want to use it. Do I want to do what I was going to do before, but I'm just going to do it faster? Or do I want to do it to explore and push the story and the creative in a different way? And so you can kind of decide, when you get the time back, what do I do with the time? So even if it is a 2x thing, it doesn't necessarily mean the movie's going to cost half as much because it's half as much time. We just might choose to create things that we wouldn't able to create before, or raise the bar on the content. So that's just one example. Obviously, that's extended now into the live action world with things like Lion King and Mandalorian, with the use of game engine technology there. But I think we're just in the first or second inning with that stuff. I saw the other day Epic, introduce their metahumans kind of out into the world. And so you could see a path where those things become more and more a part of how we make content. And I think that's going to be powerful. But I think there's other technologies that are coming. It's laborious to have a character get up and walk and do that animation. That takes a lot of work. More and more of that, at DreamWorks, we're working on this, automating it, having a walk cycle where you hit a button and the character goes. I'm probably describing something pretty rudimentary, but you get the idea. Having more and more of that built by AI, so that those tools are more powerful, will really change the game of how we create content.
It makes a lot of sense. And we're looking at a lot of early stage startups in and around that space. Content creation, how do you, go from storyboards? Even we have a company on the website development, you can actually draw a wireframe, take a picture, automatically create a working prototype, and export the code. So that is in the design space, very something similar that could be done by storyboarding, from storyboarding and entertainment to faster, increase the process, or extrapolate the creativity. I think another piece of the puzzle, obviously this is a recurring theme because of your role and our interest about how do new technologies create new monetization. So what, when you said 2x for the production, when you're looking at new monetization streams, some big companies say, well, we can't do that unless we believe it's a 50 million, 100 million, or $1 billion opportunity. How do you test these opportunities?
Testing them, the bar for testing is not that high. It doesn't need to be 100 million, because there's not a lot of downside, right? As long as you're protecting our IP and not devaluing the IP, if you put something out there and it doesn't work, that's kind of okay, as long as it doesn't cannibalize something else, which it wouldn't in this case, and as long as it doesn't damage the IP. So I think that bar for testing is not that high, frankly. We just need to make sure that it protects our IP and doesn't cannibalize or diminish some other opportunity. And that's the mode that we're in right now, Evan, with a lot of these new things, which is we want to figure it out. That's why it often starts with marketing, and then we see, can we lean in further? Ultimately, though, to put resource behind it and sort of productize it and get to that monetization place, every dollar counts. Obviously, the things that generate in the hundreds of millions are going to get a full division associated with them. Things that aren't, will become a piece of what our licensing group does. One thing I did want to, just make sure I landed inside of all this is it's hard for studios to be first movers. There's not a lot of advantages to being a first mover in our space. I know there is a technology space, or if you're building a platform, and even in other parts of the media business, there are advantages for it. Not really as an IP owner, because in fact, it usually goes the other way, where there's a bit of a penalty or a tax you pay for being first, for not striking the most aggressive deal terms, or for figuring it out, or having some user do something you don't want them to do with your content. Like, there's a lot of risk associated with it. And usually it's better to be second or third, where you go, oh, they did, Paramount did that with Transformers. Great. Now I get to show up with Jurassic and say, I want the same deal, but I can skip the pitfalls that they encountered. And that is an overcome that we're trying to push through, because it is still, there's value in being first in terms of setting things up so that there's a market for us and others to participate in. But it is risky and usually not that lucrative for film studios, IP owners, to be a first mover. And right. I know there's a lot of frustration with Hollywood being legacy players and not being innovation oriented, but it's just important to understand that, the way that we're oriented. Until a Brinks truck of cash pulls up at Warner Brothers or Disney, we're usually disinclined to do anything. And then when it does, sure, you go up and say, all right, drop one off at my house too.
Yeah, send one my way as well. You mentioned earlier the democratization and the creator economy and tens of millions on YouTube, social media, TikTok, everywhere. Yeah. Could that over time disintermediate Hollywood and become the de facto majority of high-end content created? Or
yeah, I think it's unlikely that it would completely displace that, or that it would be as high value. But I do think it's an important part of what's happened, right? Just if I go back to when I was watching Miami Vice to now, the world has become a lot more fragmented in terms of that expansion, both in terms of content creation and the platforms, but also globalization and how connected we are. The world has become more fragmented. So you have some things that have allowed our content to travel more, which is the connected world. And so you have a tentpole movie, you can reach corners of the world today that it wasn't able to reach as easily in the past, right? I have, my family is from India, and I remember it was almost like a time lag of like a year before things that I saw back in the US would show up there in movie theaters or on TV. That doesn't exist anymore. So content can be scaled in that way. At the same time, there's so much more of it. There's so much more fragmentation. There's so much more local content or regional content that appeals to people. I see what's happening with, call it the creator economy, as another version of that, where there's more and more content for people to consume. So that definitely raises a bar for all of us in terms of what we have to put out there to be compelling. And I think it's also, though, an opportunity where you go, hey, those same platforms, if people are consuming, this is a silly example, if people are consuming memes a lot, let's make sure IP are part of those memes. I know there's some great Minions memes out there, right? And so
I would agree with you. I think that's great.
We're in it.
I agree. So we got a minute or so left until on that, the second level, and I asked a little bit of a different question earlier, but what is your advice? Because I'm sure you see a lot of entrepreneurs and they work with different parts of your divisions, and they make a lot of mistakes. They might have great opportunities, but they can't deal with the bureaucracy or let's not even say bureaucracy, but the process of any company. It could be healthcare or it could be Hollywood. Doesn't matter. Every business has it.
Yeah.
You've seen lots of mistakes. In one sentence, what's the most important advice to help entrepreneurs succeed, which will then also help you find the best opportunities to test monetization, production, et cetera? Yeah.
One sentence, Evan. That's a tough assignment. I would say, think of us, if I make it specific to us, as IP owners who are very protective of our IP assets. And just have that in your mind when you come to engage, because we are very risk averse when it comes to that IP, and you could plug in, talent relationships for IP and reach the same conclusion.
Okay, that's helpful. And then the last one is, what is the visual tech that you're most excited about that today probably seems like science fiction, but in 20 years will be a reality?
I think AI-powered content creation tools are super exciting.
Hallelujah.
Yeah, yeah. That's it. One sentence. That's what I'd say. And even though we are risk averse when it comes to our IP, we know we need to have it out there in the world in a broader way, and we're leading forward into figuring that out. Everything we talked about, Evan, right down to putting Trolls out on premium video on demand, comes to that same place, which is if there's a chasm to cross to get our IP out in new and different ways, we're ready to cross it. And being able to use those tools to create new content and get to different consumers is real priority for us.
Well, thank you very much. I think that's great to end on. I mean, we could talk for another hour, but appreciate and honored for you to join us. We look forward to finding collaboration opportunities for the audience and us and you, and hopefully you reach those next targets of 2, 3, and 4 times evolution in production and revenue.
I love it. Thanks, Evan. And yeah, and if I get to 100 times, you'll all get a little royalty for it. Appreciate it.
Okay, that sounds great. Abhijay, thank you again. And I'm going to pass it to Abby to give some closing notes. Have a great day and stay safe.
Thank you, too. Appreciate it, Evan.
All right. Thank you, everybody, so much for tuning in. Today, special thanks goes out to our partners, M12, Silicon Valley Bank. A shout out to Karina at Voice and Shape for her amazing illustrations. Microsoft for Startups, LaFosse Associates, Crunchbase, and 10X. We really appreciate your partnership on this event. And of course, it wouldn't be possible without all of you tuning in and bearing with us through all of these fantastic keynotes. We really hope that you enjoyed. Write us, tell us about it, tweet us, everything else. We want to hear from you. Thank you.
Thanks, Abby. Thanks, everybody. Fantastic teamwork. And look forward to hopefully seeing you all again in person at our next one. Please stay safe and be well. Bye.
Bye, everybody.